my opinion, the single greatest marketing campaign of all time was a mining company creating a rite and ritual that has now forever changed the way that the world operates. And this is like, if a mining company can do something so creative and so clever, anybody can. And that was the De Beers Mining Company creating the engagement ring and the ritual that you have to give your fiance a diamond ring to get married. That is so institutionalized. We think it's a law. Like we think it's like a requirement. It's not. It's a marketing campaign that they've come up with as a way that we now feel guilty by not participating in that.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Podium Stories. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Chris. Chris is the CEO of Cold Collective. Chris, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure, Marty. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. I obviously know about Cold Collective and the work that you guys are doing there. But before we get into the story, can you give us the elevator pitch for the audience that is listening and might not be fully aware of Cold Collective? What are the type of work that you guys there? Can I give us the 30-second, 1-minute elevator pitch?
Yep, we're a customer experience firm that is helping businesses convert sort of casual shoppers, transactional shoppers into what we call brand advocates, or sometimes if we're being really provocative, we call them cult-like followers. So we just believe that too many businesses are overly investing in awareness, and what they should be investing in is advocacy, because they get awareness and a whole other host of benefits that the most desirable and sort of iconic brands on the planet have been doing for decades. And all we've tried to do is reverse engineer their playbook and figure out how do we apply that to businesses of different sizes and in different categories.
I love that. I cannot wait to dive in on that. But before we do that, can you take us back to how did Chris get to build this company? How does Chris get here? What's the origin story that drove you to starting Cold Collective and working on this problem?
Yeah, so I've been doing this. I've been in the marketing and brand building space for about 22 years. I spent the first half client side working with big brands like John Deere and Home Depot. And then I kind of sold my soul and went to the agency side. About 5.5 years after doing that, an opportunity came up in Canada to take over a small agency. And kind of when I was the boss, you're working for an agency, you kind of do what the boss tells you to do. But when you discover that you are the boss, you can start to change the rules. And there was just several things about the agency model that I did not like. And probably chief among them was taking clients' money to do things that they asked you to do, but you knew were not going to make a difference. We're not going to make the result. And so I like to say I grew a conscience, but I had just enough integrity and just enough courage to say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to keep pretending that these typically very paid media centric or digital advertising centric kind of things were actually going to fix what was wrong with the business. Often what's wrong with the business is their product sucks, or their culture sucks, or their pricing is wrong, or they don't have a compelling enough positioning. And when we went in as an ad agency, nobody wanted to hear that from us. So we killed our ad agency. We started a new species of provider that we called an engagement firm, much more focused on customer experience. There's elements of employee experience that goes into that, because for many businesses, their employees are their brand. If you have a big call center, if you have a big website or a storefront, if you have a big sales force, your people need to be completely converted to who you are and what you stand for. And unfortunately, not many people are focused on how to do that. And so that's the niche that we're trying to fill.
I love that. As someone that runs an agency, we're about 8-9 people, bootstrapped, fully self-funded. It is a tough proposition and problem sometimes, right? To say, look, I know you guys want to give us money, but we don't believe that that's going to make an impact. I think you need to solve X, Y, Z. And it's hard to make that choice, but I think the good agencies are able to stand for something and do that. I love how the story got you here. I was listening to a podcast and you talk about cult-like brands. or brands that have advocacy from their buyers. Can you tell me a bit more about what does a cult-like brand mean? How can we define the term? How can we know what's a cult-like brand in a world of so many brands, so many noise?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it is admittedly a cute and controversial label, because
Right.
normally cults are bad things, but we've seen it used elsewhere. You can have like a cult restaurant or a cult movie or a cult rock band. Like there are people who have used that language in a positive way, and we've tried to say we've just discovered it started, I don't know, 10 or 11 years ago when we were trying to compete against Lululemon. Actually, I'd even go back. It started when I was at John Deere. I joined John Deere in 2000. So you got to imagine around 1999, everybody was talking about, the last century and who was the biggest celebrity and what was the most successful company and what was
Right.
all these things that happened in the 1900s, if you will. And I saw a list of the 10 most powerful brands of the 1900s. It included what you might expect: Coca-Cola,
Right.
Mercedes-Benz was on there. I actually don't think Apple was on there at the time. Microsoft might have been, but one of them was John Deere. And so I limited my career search. I just wanted to work at the best, biggest brand I could find. And it was insane. This is before email, but like people would mail in pictures of their kids' John Deere birthday party, or their kids' John Deere pajamas, or their farm's John Deere mailbox. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, of John Deere tattoos. And it was like, what is going on here? It's a tractor. So that was actually my first exposure to this means something to people beyond some functional benefit. There's an emotional, almost irrational attachment for that. And then fast forward, and I'm competing against Lululemon, and Lululemon was just this crazy. Women had this irrational affinity, and they were expensive. They never went on sale, and they never advertised. And we were like, wow. Right. They got to $1 billion without spending money on advertising. How's that possible? So that just started, that was like the little thread we started to pull to say, who else does that? Holy crap, Costco does that, and Spanx did that, and Kiehl's did it. Like, they weren't the exception. They were exceptional, but we found dozens of brands that were just, they believed different things and they behaved differently. And everybody knows about Nike's story. Everybody knows about Starbucks' story or Apple's story. This is learned behavior. Like, you can be taught these things. You don't just have to it's not like these people had something in their DNA that made them extraordinary. It's they just had a certain set of convictions and beliefs. And so all we try to do is codify that. We turn them into 8 distinct principles that we saw cult brands doing. And some of the symptoms were they had above average employee engagement. They were like always the best places to work. Like Zappos had 250 call center positions, and they received 25,000 resumes, which made Zappos more selective than Harvard. Like, it was like, what's going on there? It's just a call center position. How do they do that? So rather than just sort of be amused by them or be curious by them, we began to just study them and do a deep dive on them. And then we just simply have written down what we found, and we're trying to tell the world about it, which is why I'm grateful to be on podcasts like this and chatting with you, Marty, to talk about it.
I love that. You mentioned the 8 principles, and I was going through a few of them. I don't want to cover all of them because maybe that used to take us a bit too much, but there's a few of them that I'd love to hear more if you could expand on them and kind of give us your thoughts on that. So there's one that I think is very interesting, the principle of co-creation, right? Like co-create. What do you mean by co-creation? How can brands kind of leverage that principle?
So it's such a good one to pick because for traditional marketers, since the advent of the television, think about how many agencies exist. They think that their job is to talk really well, or to draw, or to photograph, or to video, but they're always telling stories. They're always trying to pride themselves on how cute or how funny or how sexy they can make their product seem. And yet when you study cult brands, they're almost more proud for how well they listen than how well they talk. And they've created feedback loops. And some of them are very substantive, like Lego. fired their R&D department. All of their product innovation now comes from a closed community of master builders, non-compensated, 10,000 Lego enthusiasts who are telling Lego, here's what you should be doing, and they just listen.
Wow.
The really superficial things like Madden video game. I mean, more people vote for which athlete should be on the cover of the next Madden release than vote for the president of the United States. It's just become this phenomenon. And there's a whole community around, there's actually a curse. They call it the Madden cover curse. So athletes that have been chosen for that usually get injured the following season. So some people vote for the best athlete, and some people vote for the athlete they want to have.
They want to get injured.
So their team can go on and beat them or something. But so it's this idea, and it's become really easy with social listening, but the idea of participating in Reddit groups or, one of my very favorite cult brands is Yeti. And Yeti doesn't have channel managers, they have customer segment managers. And these people go and live amongst the surfers or the hunters or the rodeo people to say, before we're ever going to pretend to know this group, we have to be among them and we have to listen to them, know what they're talking about, know what products are working or not working for them. And I see marketing teams like take 6 weeks and a little bit of money and do a little research project, typically with a survey, and then they think they have intelligence about or insight into their customers, and it's obnoxious. No, you really got to go deep.
I love that. What about congregation, right? I thought there's a couple more that I kind of want to run by you, and congregation is one of them. Because when we think about these brands, a lot of them are like e-commerce, D2C, and then you buy online. Some of them you never kind of see them. But how can brands use congregation to build more customer advocacy among them?
So the principle is creating moments for customers or brand fans, advocates, cult-like followers, pick your word, to get together and revel in their togetherness. So the key to congregate is not where can you create more opportunities for your brand to interact with customers, but rather where can you create more opportunities for your customers to interact with each other. And so the best B2B example is really Dreamforce. I mean, if you think about what Salesforce did, Salesforce was spending millions and millions of dollars, like every other B2B brand, going to lame trade shows, setting up their 10 by 10 or 20 by 20 booths in a sea of sameness at a convention floor in Vegas or Miami. And it was pretty mediocre. And they were like, to hell with this. We're going to create something so desirable that rather than pay millions of dollars to be there, we're going to get paid millions of dollars for people to come. And I think they have like over 200 are paying thousands of dollars for essentially a week-long commercial on Salesforce software, right? It's so opposite of what every other business is doing because they think that they have to be so polite and so proper in terms of following the rules of what everybody else does. Every B2B client I've ever worked with has said, I'm at the trade show because I fear that if I'm not there, my competition's going to be there and something's going to happen. So they're not there out of desire.
Right.
They're out of obligation and out of this necessary evil. And it's like, just repurpose that money and build something that people want to actually be a part of.
I love that. One more, create rites and rituals. And this is getting very cult-like at this point. But I personally love it because I think it's a great way to put things in a way that actually means something to people. I think the cult terminology, maybe as a marketer, I just love it. But when we come to create rites and rituals, how can brands really become part of their customers' lives in that way?
Yeah, that's a good one to choose. It is the most sort of based on religion, fraternity, military, like real cult-like organizations have, clothing and secret handshakes and lingo and code words and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, listen, I tell people, in my opinion, the single greatest marketing campaign of all time was a mining company creating a rite and ritual that has now forever changed the way that the world operates. And this is like, if a mining company can do something so creative and so clever, anybody can. Any software company, I don't care if you're selling B2B office computer supply or office supplies, if a mining company can do it. And that was the De Beers mining company creating the engagement ring and the ritual that you have to give your fiance a diamond ring to get married. That is so institutionalized. We think it's a law. Like we think
That's
it's
brilliant.
like a requirement. It's not. It's a marketing campaign that they've come up with as a way that we now feel guilty by not participating in that. And then there's more superficial ones like Amazon Prime Day. I mean, Amazon
Right.
invented a holiday. Black Friday
Right.
wasn't good enough for them. Black Friday was shared.
There
by
were so many
every
people
other
competing, right?
Yeah, so they invented a new thing that's now like front page news. When is Black Friday? When is Amazon Prime Day? And what did they sell? And all this kind of stuff. So all that's required, and particularly for your B2B listeners, Marty, is there is no delineation in the cult brand playbooks between B2C, B2B, nonprofit, government, academia. Like they're all eligible. The difference is B2C is littered with people with more courage and more creativity, a bigger desire to break through and do the opposite of what everybody else is doing. And we find in the B2B space, there's more complacency and less courage, where they're just trying to follow the pack and not stick out. And that's what's prohibiting them from reaping the benefits of cult-like status.
I love that. And I was going to ask you about this later, but let's address it right now. How can we make B2B marketers, CMOs, CXOs, CEOs become more open to acting like D2C brands? How can we make B2B more D2C-like? For example, just to give an example, at my agency, we believe all B2B companies need to become media companies and be more like Netflix, where they're creating their own shows and they're creating their own content. And we're trying to make that move forward. But it does seem like a lot of B2B brands are very stuck in the old compliant, reliable, safe, no risks. How can we make that change? Is it possible to make that change within the majority of B2B brands?
Yeah, what we have learned is that nobody's going to change their behaviors until they change their beliefs. So we need to spend more time on their ideologies and on their paradigms. Why do they believe the things that they believe? And then we try to expose them to new role models. So one of the things that we started right after we launched Cult was an annual event called The Gathering. Your listeners can find it at cultgathering.com. But it's essentially 1,000 business leaders come to this 150-year-old castle in the Canadian Rockies. It's spectacular. But it's all about, like, don't take my word for it. I'm going to bring 50 of the most unquestionably awesome brands, and they're going to tell you what they did to convince their board or to overcome their fears. And it's going to fill your head with a whole new, oh, wow, I didn't realize creativity is actually out there. Because most of the time, we're just looking over our shoulder at what our competitors are doing. So if they're mediocre, your job is to be 1% better than mediocre. But when you see somebody doing something extraordinary, and not only is it successful, but they're happier, they're more engaged, they're more fulfilled, like they're just better human beings, like they're just more genuinely better, then you start to say, wow, I want to be like that. Because I just don't think enough B2B, I don't think enough people in general have enough professional role models. We find role models to be better husbands or better fathers or better, community citizens. I think we need better role models to be better business leaders. So that's one part, is just we need more exposure to who they are. And then the second thing is we just need more proof points. And the goal is to just test and learn your way into it. It's not binary. You don't go from being, all about Google keywords and outbound sales calls to doing cult-like stuff overnight. But you carve off a small percentage. You take some small, safe steps. It's kind of like losing weight, right? Like you don't just want to drop 20 pounds over 2 weeks by starving yourself, because it's not sustainable. You got to get a personal trainer and work on a plan and set out over a period of time and create new habits and start to see the benefits over time and say, I feel better, I have more energy, I'm sleeping better, whatever. And then you start to say, I'm going to do more and more of it.
I love that, especially that first point. For our agency, we're currently like writing this like Twitter threads and case studies of companies that are already doing what we want the market to understand, so that they can see some winners and be like, that's where I want to get my company too. I love that. I think we look at that in a very similar fashion. When we talk about marketing and building customer advocacy, intuitively we talked about externally, right? Like getting the buyers to be more to be advocates of our brands. But I've also seen you talk about how, and I think this is one of the principles, we have to build inside out and focus our energies internally. How can we make even our culture, even our employees, the first advocates? Because if the people inside the company don't fully buy in, how can we get people from the outside to even buy in?
The two greatest signs of an advocate is, are they investing with you, not just buying your stuff, but like owning your stock, and right. Are they working for you? Like, it's one thing to buy your product on occasion. It's another to say, I'm going to give you 40, 50 hours a week of my time, right? So I definitely believe one of the cult brand principles, as you mentioned, is all about converting employees into evangelists. And the problem that businesses have is that the HR team is often incapable of doing that. They don't have the same set of skills. They certainly don't have the same amount of resources that the marketing department has. So we were so pleasantly surprised. We didn't go into this really thinking much about internal engagement. And then the cult brands themselves showed us, look at how much energy, how many calories CMOs are spending on internal stakeholders. I remember one of the biggest ones was Airbnb. I was just gobsmacked at how much time the CMO thought that his job was to make sure that the hosts and the employees, and they were growing gangbusters, hiring 1,000 people a year kind of a thing. So right. it was a big challenge. Frankly, it's a challenge now. I spoke with a CEO a couple months ago who said, Chris, the biggest inhibitor to our growth is I have 800 vacant job openings right now. Like wow. I'm not, and the great resignation that we're kind of dealing with is all part of this problem. And that's not an HR problem. That's a marketing and a brand problem. And they have tools, they have copywriters and digital builders and mobile apps that should be deployed on those employer branding type issues. So I like to say, Marty, that marketers got very, very comfortable for the past 20 years sort of being bedfellows with the IT department because they needed point of sale and websites and mobile and social. They're going to become, the next 20 years is going to become bedfellows with the HR department. And you're going to see more and more synergies, understanding the correlation between, nobody's going to love you more than your employees do.
I love that. A good sign I look for in this type of companies are where the employees are creating content because they want to. And they're creating thought leadership on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever it is, because they really believe in the company's mission. They believe in what they're trying to achieve. I have a final question.
And referring people. If you really want to have a quick symptom, how much of your business, how much of your money is set aside for headhunter and recruiting fees? Like if you're having to pay people to get people to come on board, that's a problem.
Final question, because I know we're getting at the top of the hour and I want to be respectful of your time, Chris. So let's say companies put all this effort into kind of become a cult-like company. They build this customer advocacy. How can they not lose their soul over time? How can they continue to be that and not lose? How can that cult-like movement be sustained over time?
Boy, it's tough. It's every year at the gathering, we try to honor at least one brand that's been around for 100 or more years.
Wow.
Because if you can overcome that kind of shifts in global socioeconomic trends, you're clearly, so whether it's Levi's or this year we're doing Big Brothers Big Sisters, a nonprofit, or Molson Canadian Beer, or Jack Daniels, like there's the Harlem Globetrotters, like there are some brands that have found ways to stay relevant, but the average lifespan, not just of a cult brand, but an average lifespan of all Fortune 500 companies is now 15 years. Think about how short a business actually, like if you're a 20-year-old business, you're like a senior citizen in the scheme of things. And you're the exception, not the rule. And so really it comes down to not resting on your laurels. And the biggest things that happen is once you go public, Wall Street tends to kill more cult brands than it creates. And it's when the founder leaves, right? Like it's why Apple had to bring Steve Jobs back, or Starbucks had to bring Howard Schultz back. It's when the founder leaves, everything that was noble and pure and passionate about that business gets handed off to operators who are less pure and less passionate. And they might be profitable, but cult brands exist to help people prosper, not help people create profits. Profits is 1/8 of the things that cult brands are existing to do. And so we like to try to stay as close to the insurgent mindset of what was this business initially intended to do? Why did it disrupt the category? Why did it become successful? And then lean into those things versus forget about those things and get greedy and just try to grow for growth's sake.
Absolutely. And if they follow the principles that we talked about, eventually the profits come as well, right? Like it's a win-win for that.
Cult brands are category leaders, right? It's not
Right.
like you have to sacrifice your profits. It's just that you start to realize profits is an outcome of becoming
Exactly.
cult-like versus the objective of becoming a business.
I love that. Chris, I think that's a great way to end it. I think we could talk about this for hours, but I appreciate you being here. For everybody listening, we're going to put the link to Chris's LinkedIn, to the Cult Collective, to the gathering. We're going to put everything in the episode. Thank you so much for listening. Chris, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciated our conversation today.
My pleasure, Marty. Thank you.
Absolutely. And for everybody else, we'll see you next time.